Prison escapes, one of the most interesting and captivating stories that can be told. A concept so out there, an entire TV show winning multiple awards centered around that very concept. In reality, an unlikely to impossible event, with most escapes being stopped within the very walls of the prison, and those that make it outside usually are apprehended within hours, let alone days. So how did a man, Australia's most wanted man, break out of the inescapable prison for 11 years? This is the story of Russell "Mad Dog" Cox. In 1975, a supermax state-of-the-art prison was built in the Long Bay Correctional Facility in Sydney, NSW. The prison was designed to house the worst of the worst, including terrorists, murderers, and other problematic inmates. Some called it the electronic zoo. The design of the prison was to keep inmates from the outside world. The prisoners even had limited interactions with guards. The jail closed in 1978 due to public discussion regarding the treatment and human rights of these prisoners. This jail was designed to ensure no one escaped. Katingal was knocked down in 2004. It was reported even years after the removal of prisoners the prison smelt of a tear gas residue. In 1949, Russell "a Mad Dog" Cox was born in Brisbane, Australia, interestingly enough under the name Melville Peter Schnitzling. Cox would go under many different names and personas throughout his later years. Trouble would find Cox in his early childhood years, where he first committed petty crimes, mostly stealing bikes and other property as young as the age of 8, and a year after was placed in boys' homes for his criminal behavior. Cox would spend majority of his teen years in juvenile centers and boy homes, before being sent to his first adult prison for stealing a car. Russell Cox was a notorious armed bank robber. Mark "Chopper" Reed referred to Cox as the Banjo Patterson of armed robberies. He was linked to a string of armed robberies along the city of Sydney. In 1974, Cox was apprehended and sentenced to 14 years prison to be served at Long Bay Prison. No more than a year later, Cox attempted to escape. He attempted to escape with 2 other prisoners. Cox was able to obtain a Beretta pistol. Under the coercion of the pistol, Cox and the 2 other inmates forced guards to a weapons room where they were able to obtain more weapons, and also, still while holding a prison officer hostage, a 5-ton truck. With the gun held to the officer's throat, they were able to have another guard open the main gate, where they began driving beyond the prison walls. At this time they had both guards and police in pursuit of Cox and his crew. They began a shootout, with police firing at the truck and the 3 on the truck firing back at the cops. A truck entering the prison to deliver some items collided with the truck, which forced the 3 inmates to go on foot. They were eventually outnumbered and overpowered and returned to the prison. During the shootout, Cox and one of the other prisoners were shot. The inmates of the prison began to threaten to riot due to the lack of medical attention the wounded received. After some time they were given medical assistance. Cox was charged with attempted murder of the prison guard and attempted escape, adding on a further 9 years to his existing sentence. Russell Cox was known by fellow prisoners and guards as a fitness freak. He would run up and down the prison yard doing lap after lap and exercises such as push-ups, sit-ups and chin-ups on the bars at the prison to stay in tip-top physical shape. This was absolutely paramount to his escape. When Cox was at court, he smuggled a small hacksaw blade into his belt. When out in the yard, he would pull himself up and do chin-ups. Whilst doing this, he would jump up on the bars and hang with one hand on the bar, and the other hand he would slowly chip away at the metal bar. After several days and weeks of cutting the bar, he finally had cut the bar off where his escape began. Once on the roof, he had to scale down and jump 2 fences, both of which were 4 meters tall. He then got over the exterior brick wall, where he had to run some distance, and then hopped into a car. This was the start of a life on the run. After his escape from prison, he fell in love with a nurse, Helen Dean. The relationship lasted all of the 11 years on the run. For most of this time, it is believed that Helen was immune from the fact that she had been in a relationship with, at the time, Australia's most wanted man. In 1982, after some time, 8 years on the run, money and means of living would start to become difficult for Cox. While on the run, there is no legitimate way of making money. This would force Cox into further armed robbery. This time in Brisbane, Queensland. Cox would hold up an armoured van where $327,000 would be stolen. This would be equivalent to $1 million in 2025. This would put Cox back on the police radar, with further sightings of Cox linking him to a farm the north of New South Wales. Police had set up surveillance on and around the farm. people told police they had sighted Cox driving a tractor. Police would have come up with a plan to go and apprehend Cox, however just the morning after the sighting of Cox on the tractor, Cox had took off and the police were left empty-handed. Cox would constantly change location, moving between state borders. From far north Queensland to Victoria, he was a very hard man for the police to track. While on the run, it is believed Cox would also obtain unemployment benefits. During the 80s, it was far easier for people to obtain unemployment with far less restrictions around things such as identification and shared databases between government agencies. Russell Cox's face was plastered on the front of every newspaper. The only issue, Cox was a master of disguise. His mugshots changed drastically, they don't even look like the same person, let alone even related. The different looks made it impossible for police to track him or for anyone of the public to notify police of his whereabouts. Cox would study and practice changing and altering his appearance. Using methods such as growing facial hair, glasses, changing his weight and many other things. In January 1983, Cox, still on the run, goes to what is known as the Mount Martha hideout, 50 kilometers southeast of the city Melbourne. The house was occupied by notorious armed robber and accomplice of Cox, Ian Carroll. The house was just a suburban home looking nothing out of the ordinary. Cox was hiding in plain sight. Cox and Carroll get into an argument where both men shoot each other, where Carroll died and Cox had been injured during the shootout. It is believed that his partner, Helen Dean, used her nursing skills to save Cox's life. In the house, police found a number of items which would have been essential for committing armed robberies, including a number of automatic weapons. Cox would move again, where he continued his seemingly normal life on the run. However, his luck would eventually run out. In 1988, Cox was accompanied by another notorious armed robber, Raymond Denning. These two were Australia's most popular bank robbers. A security guard had noticed two men sitting in a car acting rather strange at the Doncaster shopping town. The pair were planning to rob an armoured truck which was due for a delivery that day. They planned to take the truck at gunpoint. Police arrived at the scene, where it would shortly become a shootout. Denning was far more compliant than Cox, exiting the car with his hands raised. Cox attempted to flee the scene, driving his car directly at the police officers. They fired at the vehicle with a shotgun, hitting it 3 times. Cox then crashed the car and was shortly after arrested. Police at the time were unaware of just who they had arrested. His time on the run of 11 years had come to an end. Some people believe that Denning's escape was set up by police authorities in the hope that he would lead them to Cox. However, police strongly deny this claim, saying the capture was simply a fluke. Cox was charged with a string of armed robbery offences, however was acquitted of the murder of Ian Carroll, as there was not enough evidence as to who shot first. Helen Dean was arrested and sentenced to 6 months jail after being caught with a pen gun in her handbag. From 1988 to 2004, Cox served his time in prisons across Victoria, Queensland and New South Wales. During this time, Cox was a model prisoner. He would take part in programs in attempting to keeping young prisoners out of the system, talking and sharing his story with them. Even the prison officer who Cox pointed a gun at in his first attempted escape advocated for his release. On the 8th of December, 2004, Russell Cox had been released from prison under close surveillance. Post-release, Cox lived out the rest of his working years as a builder's labourer and cleaner, where he and Helen Dean are still in a relationship to this day.